Welcome to the debate. So, have you ever been walking down the street and you have to step over one of those massive open storm drains while holding your brand new phone just loosely in your hand?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. The absolute grip of death. You squeeze it like your life depends on it.
Right. You grip it, your eyes lock onto the metal grate, and your breath catches. And for those 3 seconds, the rest of the world completely vanishes.
Yeah, you don't hear the traffic.
Exactly. You don't feel the wind, you aren't thinking about the email you forgot to send yesterday, or what you're having for dinner tonight. There is only you, the phone, and the grate.
It's pure survival mode.
Right. So today we are looking at whether that intense, kind of exclusionary tunnel vision focus is actually a profound psychological tool, and maybe even the secret to curing chronic anxiety.
It is a really fascinating question, and we're exploring it through a specific narrative from our source material, The Wordy Tales. The story presents us with Marco.
Yeah.
He's a 24-year-old guy who is, well, he is fundamentally trapped. He is suffering from a profound state of what psychologists might call temporal fragmentation.
Which is just a brilliant way to describe a mind that is constantly living everywhere except the present.
Yeah. Marco is anchored heavily by the regrets of his past, things he cannot change, and he's constantly shadowed by anxieties about his future, things that haven't even happened yet.
And this mental storm prevents him from sleeping, it completely robs him of joy, and it just leaves him utterly exhausted.
Right. So to cure this condition, Marco seeks out a village elder. But, and this is the crucial detail here, this elder used to be a famous city psychologist.
Right.
And this former psychologist gives Marco a highly specific, very physical task. He fills a glass with water, completely to the brim, and tells Marco to walk through a bustling, chaotic, narrow village road and return without spilling a single drop.
And Marco succeeds. He walks through the village, he completely tunes out the shopkeepers yelling, the dogs barking, the children playing.
He hears none of it.
None of it. And that brings us to the central disagreement of our discourse today. We are looking at the psychological mechanisms that play in this intervention. Does Marco's success in ignoring the village noise represent a masterful achievement of inner peace through intentional selective attention in the flow state?
Or does this extreme, single-pointed concentration actually represent a restrictive tunnel vision, like a temporary distraction technique born of cognitive overload rather than a sustainable model for genuine mindfulness?
Well, I take the position that carrying a glass so full that a single shake causes failure is a metaphor for high-stress tunnel vision, which successfully distracts the mind but ultimately blinds an individual to the vibrant reality of the present moment.
And I take the position that the story brilliantly illustrates how adopting a flow state and fiercely protecting one's intentional focus cures temporal fragmentation, proving that peace is an active, perceptual skill.
So, where do we begin with Marco?
Let's start by really unpacking Marco's initial condition, because it perfectly captures that concept of the time trap.
Yeah, living everywhere but the present.
Right. Human suffering often stems from this exact kind of temporal fragmentation. I mean, think about the brain like a battery. When your cognitive energy is constantly split, say 50% agonizing over what you did yesterday, 50% simulating worst-case scenarios for tomorrow, your mental battery drains entirely.
You have zero energy left for what's actually happening right in front of you. I agree entirely with that diagnosis. The physiological toll of that kind of generalized anxiety is just immense.
It really is. So the old man's task with the water glass is not just some parlor trick. It is a profound, actionable metaphor for mindfulness. By giving Marco a glass full to the brim, the elder is giving him a physical representation of his internal state, or, his most critical life goals.
Okay, but
He forces Marco to commit 100% of his cognitive resources to a single point in space and time. This is the very essence of deep work. Because Marco applies total, unyielding concentration to the water, his brain automatically filters out the irrelevant data.
the village noise.
Exactly. The noisy village road represents the modern cacophony we all face. Social media, public opinion, endless notifications. My argument is that inner peace isn't the absence of cognitive load. Peace is the intentional direction of that load. It's an active choice to refuse to let the chaotic world invade your attention.
Look, I hear you on the energy drain of the time trap. And like I said, the diagnosis is spot on. But I come at the cure from a completely different way.
How so?
The full glass exercise is absolutely an intervention, but it's one based on cognitive overload. It is not a sustainable state of peace. Notice the specific parameter the elder set. The glass was filled so high that even a little shake would make the water spill.
Right, to demand focus.
No, to intentionally introduce a precarious, high-stakes variable into Marco's environment. Marco didn't suddenly find a Zen-like peace on that road. His brain was simply terrified of failing. It triggered an acute stress response.
But the text explicitly says his mind was quiet.
But look at how it got quiet. I mean, if you're listening to this and thinking, I could never focus like that with 100 people yelling around me, you are hitting on exactly the point I'm making. Marco's brain dumped all peripheral awareness just to survive a manufactured crisis.
I wouldn't call it a crisis.
It is to his brain. That is exactly why he failed to see the children playing or hear the dogs barking. True mindfulness, in my view, expands our awareness to include the present reality without judgment. Marco's task forced an exclusionary, fragile tunnel vision. He ignored the broader, beautiful context of life just to avoid spilling a drop of water.
Okay, I see why you characterize it as a stress response, but let's look closer at the actual mechanism of quiet that the elder induced. You're arguing that Marco was in a state of terror.
Essentially.
But the text explicitly notes that once Marco engaged with the water, there was no space for fear, there was no confusion, there were no extra thoughts at all.
Right, because his working memory was completely maxed out.
Exactly, and that is the point. The old man deliberately used this task to physically demonstrate to Marco that he possessed the internal hardware to silence his own mind.
By short-circuiting it.
No, by utilizing it properly. Marco walked into that village believing he was a helpless victim of his own thoughts. The elder showed him that his mind wasn't broken, it was just misdirected. When you occupy your working memory with an intentional, focused action, the anxiety literally has nowhere to boot up. The task proved that peace is a byproduct of flow. It's generated by the application of will.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that we can call a maxed out working memory peace. Let me explain why. We really have to look at cognitive load theory here.
Okay, let's look at it.
Human beings have a very limited number of slots in their working memory. If you fill every single one of those slots with the meniscus of a vibrating glass of water, your brain physically cannot process the auditory input of a barking dog. It's a biological bottleneck.
Sure.
And look at the elder's background. He's a former city psychologist. He knows exactly how this works. He used a behavioral trick. He substituted Marco's chronic generalized anxiety with an acute, localized task focus.
You're calling it a trick, but isn't it a highly effective treatment?
It's effective at stopping a panic attack, sure, but focusing so hard that you become deaf and blind to your surroundings, missing the people running, the animals, the life happening around you, that is a survival mechanism.
I think that's a bit dramatic.
It is the psychological equivalent of throwing a breaker switch to stop an electrical fire. It stops the fire, yeah, but you are left standing in the dark. A hyper-fixated mind that is stripped of its sensory processing capabilities is an exhausted mind, not a peaceful one.
That's a really compelling way to frame it, standing in the dark. Though I look at the exclusion of the village noise not as a deficit, but as a masterclass in selective attention. Let's move away from the breaker switch idea and update the analogy.
All right, let's hear it.
Think about a modern smartphone. If you open a massively demanding high-end video game, the phone's operating system automatically suspends or closes the background apps.
Right.
It stops checking for emails, it pauses background downloads, all to dedicate 100% of its processing power to the game.
Okay, I track with that.
Marco's failure to see the children playing isn't because his brain is broken or traumatized. It's because he successfully closed the background apps. We live in an era defined by overwhelming stimuli. If you want to perform at your highest level, if you want to protect your internal state, your glass of water, the external noise naturally has to fade. But is it noise or is it life?
It's irrelevant data to his primary goal. When the brain commits its resources fully to a single meaningful task, irrelevant data is dropped. That is exactly how flow states work neurologically. The prefrontal cortex locks in, and the amygdala, the fear center, quiets down. Marco wasn't terrified, he was highly optimized.
I actually really like the smartphone analogy. But here's where it breaks down for me. What exactly are the background apps that Marco's closing?
The yelling shopkeepers, it's not just spam emails and yelling shopkeepers, though. He is closing out the joyful elements of the present moment, the children playing on the side of the road. If your operating system is dedicating all its power to not spilling the water, you are entirely missing the reality of the village.
He didn't need the reality of the village in that moment.
But the elder tells him, when your mind stays in the present moment, yet Marco wasn't actually in the present moment of the village. He was in the micro moment of the water.
But why does the present moment have to include the entire village?
Because true, robust peace requires being able to walk down a busy road, see the children, acknowledge the shopkeepers, hear the dogs, and still keep your internal water steady.
That's a massive ask for someone suffering from severe anxiety.
Maybe, but by celebrating Marco's complete sensory isolation, the story presents a false dichotomy. It suggests you either suffer a storm of anxiety or you adopt total isolation of the senses. It completely bypasses the middle ground of integrated awareness.
I have to push back on that because you're defining the present moment as a passive reception of everything around you. Marco's action of walking, his balance, the feeling of the glass in his hands, his measured breathing, that is also the present moment.
A very narrow slice of it.
And for his specific goal, it is the most relevant part of the present moment. Think about a surgeon in an operating room.
Okay, surgery is a great example.
When a surgeon is operating, we don't want them practicing integrated awareness of the traffic outside the hospital or what the nurses are chatting about in the hall. We want them completely, exclusively locked onto the procedure.
Right.
We want them deaf to the traffic. Marco's attention was severely fragmented. He was performing emergency surgery on his own mind. He needed that exclusionary focus.
That is exactly my point, though. Surgery is an acute, high-stakes, temporary event. It is not a sustainable model for how one should navigate a Tuesday afternoon walk through their community. You cannot live your entire life on an operating table.
But Marco's life was in a state of acute crisis. He had forgotten how to smile. He couldn't sleep. The mental storm was literally tearing his life apart.
I'm not denying the severity.
The elder applied an acute intervention to break a chronic cycle. And we have to look at the developmental arc of the story's conclusion, because the real lesson is what happens after the glass is set down. Exactly. The text tells us that Marco walked back home as the sun was setting. The external world is not changing at all. The village is still noisy, the dogs are still noisy, the chaos.
Right.
But Marco's internal response is fundamentally changed. He realized that the locus of control is entirely in him. He didn't need the external world to go quiet in order to experience silence. The task itself is just a training wheels. Yes, it is wheels. In an environmental condition you have to seek out on a quiet mountain. It's a choice you make about how you direct your attention.
Look, I will certainly concede that realizing an inner locus of control is a massive psychological breakthrough. Discovering that you aren't at the mercy of your environment is incredibly empowering.
Right.
But I genuinely question the long-term viability of this full glass methodology. Let's look at the mechanics of the skill he learned. When Marco walks home without the glass, what is actually keeping him anchored?
The memory of the unified mind, the perceptual shift he just experienced.
But the elder specifically told him, you must not spill even one drop of water. That is a zero-tolerance policy for error. Marco was highly motivated by the fear of failure in front of an authority figure.
I think it was more about the challenge.
Even if it was the challenge, if we translate this acute exercise into a chronic lifestyle, we run into a major problem. If inner peace is predicated on treating your primary intentions with the fragility of a completely full glass, you are going to end up walking on eggshells inside your own mind.
I don't see it as fragility at all.
Spill, any unexpected interruption by the outside world, a friend needing help, a sudden change of plans, a dog running in front of you, is suddenly viewed as a threat.
Well,
It becomes a failure of your peace. Yes, the friction of overthinking his past disappeared, but it was replaced by the intense friction of hypervigilance. The text notes that people in the village looked at him with surprise but didn't disturb him. What happens tomorrow when someone does bump into him? Does his peace shatter on the pavement along with the water?
I hear your concern about hypervigilance, I do. But let me offer a different perspective on the idea of the glass being full. The water isn't about the fragility of his peace. It represents the totality of his commitment.
How so?
When the elder demands not even one drop, he isn't trying to make Marco paranoid. He is demanding absolute integrity of attention. Think about our daily lives. We live in a world that constantly asks for a fraction of our attention here, a tiny fraction there.
Yeah, the endless notifications.
Exactly. We give drops of our focus away continuously to notifications, to worries, to regrets, until our glass is completely empty and we feel hollow.
So the full glass is about boundary setting?
Precisely. By demanding Marco keep the glass completely full, the elder is teaching him radical protection of his internal state. And the proof that this didn't turn into a permanent pathology of hypervigilance is right there in the text.
The walk home.
Yes. When Marco walked home without the glass, he observed the sunset. He watched the birds flying back to their nests. He didn't ignore the world. He finally had the mental bandwidth to appreciate it. The intervention recharged his mental battery by unifying his cognitive resources. Once the time trap was broken, he could observe the birds without slipping back into anxiety about tomorrow.
I see the appeal of that interpretation, I really do. But I still struggle with the transition. The mechanism the elder utilized specifically required tuning out the present reality, the playing children, to achieve the goal.
Right.
You cannot train someone's brain to achieve peace by actively ignoring the joyful parts of the world, and then reasonably expect them to remain deeply connected to the world when the task is over. If the lesson was truly about living fully in the present, the elder wouldn't have given him a distraction.
A distraction?
Yes, he would have asked Marco to count the dogs or note what color shirts the children were wearing while he navigated the chaos.
But that would just be dividing his attention again. The story is arguing that happiness is not found by engaging with every single piece of noise. Happiness is the silence of the mind amidst the storm. It's the ability to choose your focus.
And I maintain that true mindfulness must eventually be robust enough to hold the full picture, noise and all.
Which brings us to the core of where we stand. To summarize my position, this narrative beautifully encapsulates how inner peace is a perceptual skill built through intentional, selective attention. By treating our primary intentions like a full glass of water and demanding our total cognitive commitment, we can navigate the noisy, chaotic village of modern life.
Right.
The story proves that we do not need to retreat from the world to find quiet. We simply need to master the intentional direction of our focus. Peace is a choice.
And to summarize my stance, while I find the old man's exercise to be a fascinating, highly effective psychological tool to break the debilitating loop of temporal fragmentation, equating this hyper-focused task execution with lasting peace is conceptually dangerous.
Dangerous is a strong word.
I think it fits. It relies on cognitive overload and the narrowing of working memory to temporarily silence anxiety. I believe it risks promoting a life where we actively tune out the vibrant, unpredictable realities of the present just to keep our own fragile water from spilling.
Well, both of these perspectives highlight just how complex human attention really is. The source material acts as a powerful mirror, forcing us to ask whether we view focus as a shield to protect us from the world or as a tool to deeply engage with the most important parts of it.
It really does challenge how you view your own daily bandwidth.
We leave you to weigh these psychological mechanisms and form your own conclusion. And as you step back out into the noise of your own village today, consider the profound question raised by the material.
Absolutely.
In your current life, what is that one glass of water, the most important thing you need to focus on right now to drown out the noise?